impact Dr.
You have to hold it because it's plugged in now.
As language teachers, but just in overall in education, because
It's on.
comprehensible input, again, we know that that is the foundation of just good teaching. Again, it doesn't matter if you're teaching academic language or language is. So, Dr. Grasham, we're ready for you. Thank you.
Can I begin with a really bad joke? A tasteless joke? It's okay? Okay, bad joke time. I'm very sleepy. I couldn't sleep last night. This woman was knocking on my hotel room door all night. Finally, I got up and I let her out. I'll tell you my mother's favorite joke, though. This was my mother's favorite joke. When I check out of hotels, they always say, "How was your room, sir?" And I said, "Well, it was okay, but I called my wife last night, and I said, I'm tired of traveling. I'm tired of traveling alone. I'd like to go someplace with you. I want to go someplace I've never been before." And she said, "How about the kitchen?" Okay, that's my talk today. All right, any questions? You have a handout, right? Please turn to the page that says Fundamentals of Language Acquisition. And we have the handout with the notes that my Chinese teacher has put together. Hi, Lu. Some of you met this morning. And we're going to begin with some important vocabulary. We have the sheet that says Fundamentals of Language Acquisition, probably page 2. We think people have two different ways of getting better in language. You can acquire language, you can learn language, and they are fundamentally different. Acquisition we sometimes call the natural way. A synonym is picking up a language. I was in Spain for a few weeks and I picked up some Spanish. It really means you acquired it. Acquisition is subconscious, and this really means two things. It means, first of all, while you're acquiring, you don't know you're acquiring. You think you're doing something else. You think you're having a conversation. You think you're reading a book. But at the same time, you might be acquiring. Also, when you're finished acquiring, you're not always aware that anything has happened. The knowledge is represented subconsciously in your brain. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say you hear someone make a mistake in your own language. Has this ever happened to you? Say yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
When you hear someone make a mistake in your own language, can you always tell exactly what rule was broken?
No.
Say no, of course not. I can't either. Most of the time I can tell you. If someone makes a mistake in English, I can tell you what rule was broken, but not always. I'd say about 5% of the time, 10% of the time, I have a feeling something is wrong, but I don't know exactly what the rule was. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So this feeling for acquisition, by the way, just so you won't feel bad if you can't tell what rule was broken, I told you I can't either. And I have a PhD in grammar, if you can imagine that, and I can't always tell. Okay, acquisition is with us our entire lives. It never goes away. Children acquire, teenagers acquire, grown-ups acquire, young people, old people, senior citizens acquire. Everybody does. The language acquisition device never shuts off. Isn't that beautiful? A person I met 25 years ago, 21 years ago actually, in Hungary. I'll never forget her. I think about her every day since I met her. The world's greatest polyglot. Her name was Lonkato. I met her when she was 86 years old. She spoke, no kidding, 17 languages. She spent her whole life in Hungary, didn't travel. It was amazing. She did it the hard way and really was successful. Every language I knew, she knew better, except English. It was the only one I knew better than she did. At our last moments together, this was 21 years ago, she took my hand. She said, "Stephen, you're so young." I was 54. So many years left, so many languages to acquire. Isn't that beautiful? Since that day, I have been doing languages every single day. It's been amazing. The language acquisition device never shuts off. Okay, that's one process, acquisition. It's there forever. The other process, learning, conscious learning. Acquisition is subconscious. Learning is conscious. Learning is knowing about language, knowing the rules, knowing the grammar. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. That's conscious learning. Now, error correction is supposed to help learning. Here's how it works. Someone corrects you. You make a mistake, someone corrects you. You're supposed to change your idea of what the rule is. So the 6-year-old limited English proficient child comes into the classroom and says, "I comes to school every day." Teacher says, no, it's "I come to school every day." The child is supposed to think, oh yeah, that S doesn't go on the first person singular, it goes on the third person singular. Okay, we're going to see that this doesn't really work out very well, but that's the idea, right? So that's the difference. The subconscious process, acquisition, picking up a language. The conscious process, learning, knowing about language. The brain does acquisition very well. We're very good at it. The brain does not do conscious learning very well. In fact, the brain does it very poorly. School emphasizes conscious learning. We are going to change that. Now, the next question is, how do acquisition and learning work for us? I'm going to come right over where you are, so I'm going to have to push you aside. Sorry. Okay, and then I'm going to look for my marker. What did I do with my marker? I never had one. That's the problem. Would a marker inside that? Would I help you? I'm going to come over here. Sorry. I'm bumping you aside. Okay, here's how it works. How do acquisition and learning work for us? The easy way to think about this is to think about what happens to you when you try to speak a language that you don't know very well. For many of you, it's your third language. For a lot of you, a language where you can kind of struggle through a conversation. Do you have a language like this? Say yes. Yeah, so think about what happens to you. For me, my intermediate language is Spanish. I can get through a conversation, okay, talk about everyday things, but sometimes I have trouble and I'm not sure something is right, okay? So here's what happens. The sentence pops into my mind. So here's acquisition here. I'll write this large enough so the first 2 rows can see it, okay? And when I can come out with a sentence easily and fluently, it comes from what I've acquired, not from what I've learned. All the rules that you learn in school do only one thing for you. They act as a monitor or an editor. So here's learning up here. You're about to say something, and then you look at it, you scan it internally, you inspect it in your mind's eye, you think of the rules, and you make corrections. That's what we think is going on. Or sometimes you say it, you realize you made a mistake, you go back and correct. Now let me tell you, this is a serious research hypothesis, and it's based on a number of studies we did back in the 1970s and early 1980s. If you'd like to read all the studies, I recommend my book, which is available for free on my website, sdkrashen.com. The title of the book is Second Language Acquisition and Second Language Learning. The subtitle of the book is The Cure for Insomnia. If you can't sleep, I recommend read my book from 1981, and you will drift off right away. This kind of stuff is so interesting to fanatics like me, you know, crazy university professors who have these very narrow interests. That's me, 100%, but it's certainly not for everyone. But if you want to see the research, that's where it is, and it's free. We did a lot of studies showing this, but rather than go through the research, let me tell you what I thought then in the 1970s, actually 1976, when this first occurred to me, what I thought the pedagogical implications were. I thought that, well, we have acquisition, we have learning, they do different things. What I decided then is acquisition gives us our fluency. Learning gives us our accuracy. Isn't that nice? Two components, two contributions. Obviously, we want both. We want our students to speak fluently and easily, but we also want the grammar to be there. We don't want a grammarless pidgin language. What I decided then is we need a balanced program. 2 days a week acquisition, 2 days a week learning, 2 days a week conversation, 2 days a week grammar. Doesn't that sound fair? Doesn't that sound moral? The truth must be somewhere in the middle. If that's Donald Trump, I'm not here. I had to defriend him on Facebook last week. Anyway, so I thought the answer is some of this, some of that, one for fluency, one for accuracy. It turns out this is wrong. It's all wrong. What the research has been telling me every day since 1975, the main thing, the action is here with acquisition. Acquisition gives us fluency and accuracy. Even for the most analytic thinking, grammar-loving adult, it's at least 95% acquisition. For the child, it's 100%. And I should also tell you this. No one was more disappointed to discover this than me. I have a PhD in grammar. Until 1975, grammar was my life. I love grammar. I can't tell you how much I love grammar. Have you ever opened a good grammar book? And just look at the verb conjugations. I think they're beautiful. Just like me, right? It's the same problem. We need therapy, I tell you. My idea of a good time, is to look at a grammar book of a new language. I don't know, see how they do the past tense, the present tense, see how, if it's a Romance language, see how they do the subjunctive. I love it. But you know what? That's not how we acquire language. My intellectual hero for many years, Noam Chomsky. Oh, the dreaded Noam Chomsky. From 1973 to 1975, I was the director of English as a second language at Queens College in New York. And I told my faculty, here are the universals of language teaching. Number one, explain the rules clearly. Number two, correct errors. That's what I said. I wrote several papers saying this. They were published in the best, most important journals. They're all wrong. Some people think that was my best work. But you're listening to a convert today. It's the research that's changed my position. It's acquisition that makes things work, not learning. So this now brings us to the big question. See, it's very hard to use this conscious grammar. It's extremely difficult, it's very limited. But let's go to the big question. If acquisition is more important than learning, the question then becomes, how do we acquire language? How does it happen? Let me begin this important discussion by making an outrageous statement. In my opinion, we all acquire language the same way. No individual variation. This is a very unpopular thing to say because today, as teachers, we're very interested in individual variation. We know our students are different. And the government, state government, federal government are always telling us standardization. Everyone does the same curriculum, the same test. And we know there's something wrong with that. People are different. They have different attitudes. They have different interests. They do things in different ways. They want different things. Another bad joke coming. Ready for another bad joke? This one's from Gary Gildeer, great comedian. He says, everybody's different. We all want different things. My grandfather told me, if everyone wanted the same thing, everyone would be chasing after your grandma. So we all want different things. But there are some things we all do the same. Let me give you some examples. Digestion. We all digest food the same. No significant individual variation. First you put it in your mouth, then down your throat, into your stomach. That's how it's done in Dallas, that's how it's done in Houston, and yes, that's also how it's done in El Paso. It's the same all over, everywhere you go. The visual system is the same. It's always the occipital lobe in the back of the brain. It's never in the side of the brain. It's never in the front, it's never in the elbow. It's true everywhere. Same thing with language acquisition. Rather than just tell you about it, though, I'd like to show you. I'd like to take a couple of minutes and do some sample language lessons with you. Before I do that, though, I need to ask for permission. Is that okay? Language lesson?
Yes, sir.
Well, even the second time, let me tell you what just happened. The people in the side and in the back thought it was a good idea. Not much reaction from right here. Let me tell you what's going on here. People far away, people here are worried I was going to call them. That's what goes through your mind. You come, you hear this lecture, this famous professor comes, he crosses the line of blood in the sand and comes right over to where you're sitting. So you get a little bit anxious, right? Who are you? Professional language teachers. And yet the idea of a language lesson in public makes you at least a little bit nervous. What does this mean? In my opinion, it means we're doing something fundamentally wrong, something fundamentally unnatural, the way we teach language. It's not your fault if you were nervous. I would feel the same way. Just to make you feel better, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to give you lessons anyway, but I'll do it up here. I'll use a language that you've heard before, maybe a couple of you speak. I'll give you 2 lessons, and you can tell me which one is better. Language lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen, und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache, und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? Do you think if I kept talking to you like that, you'd pick up German? How about if I repeated it? How about if I said it louder? How about if I wrote it on the board there? I know, I'll write it up on one of those papers. I'll erase every 5th word and you guess what the word is. None of those things. How about if I made it slow? Someone said slower, right? Any German speakers here? Okay, that was, you'd be my witness. That was pretty slow. Wasn't it? Reasonable. That wasn't the problem. Okay, now, language lesson number 2. Das ist meine Hand. Verstehen Sie das? Hand? Ja? Sagen Sie ja. Ja, gut. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf, ja? Also Kopf. Ups. Kopf. Ist gut, ja? Ja. Hier ist Mr. Spock. Ja, also Mr. Spock hat zwei Ohren. Ohren. Verstehen Sie das? Zwei Ohren. Zwei Ohren, ja? Also, Mr. Spock, ist das gut, ja? Okay. Augen. Verstehen Sie Augen, ja? Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 3 Augen. Ja, ist das richtig? 3 Augen? Nein. Wir haben nur 2 Augen, ja? 2 Augen. Also, Mr. Spock. Mund. Verstehen Sie Mund, ja? Und hier ist eine Zigarette, ja? Nein. Zigaretten sind nicht gut, ja? If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. I'm now going to share with you the most important concept I have learned about language. The best kept secret in the profession. We acquire language in one way, and only one way. Here it is. When we understand it. That's it. We acquire language when we understand it. When we understand what people tell us, or what we read. Not how they say it, but what they say. We call this comprehensible input. That's the big breakthrough. Comprehensible input. And now that you understand this important concept, let me share with you some amazing, wonderful, mystical facts about language acquisition. Amazing, wonderful, mystical fact number 1. Language acquisition is effortless. No work. All you have to do is sit back, relax, and you acquire. Number 2, language acquisition is involuntary. Ooh. If I give you comprehensible input and you understand the message, you're acquiring. You have no choice. You all just acquired some German. There's nothing you can do about it. It's over. It's too late. You can't stop it. Given comprehensible input, you must acquire. Wow. Now, in order for people to get comprehensible input, they have to pay attention to the message. Now, the easy way for that to happen is for the message to be interesting. So, the prerequisites for language acquisition, you have to have input. Try to put it up here. Input that is interesting and comprehensible both. Now, that's not easy to do. This is the art of language teaching. It's very simple to give students input that's comprehensible but not interesting. That's called school. It's also very easy to give people input that's interesting but not comprehensible. That's the outside world for beginners. And my colleagues at the university for years and years have given us lots of input that is neither interesting nor comprehensible, in my opinion. Okay? We want to do both. That's hard. That's the job of language classes. Interesting and comprehensible at the same time. Well, we want to push this even farther. Our thinking now is that the best input is not simply interesting, it's very interesting. Today's new vocabulary word, we want input that's compelling. And as you'll see, this is why I'm so happy to appear with TPRS teachers and recommend this kind of method, because this gives input that has the potential for the first time of being compelling. Compelling means the input is so interesting you forget that it's in another language. The idea comes from a sociologist, psychologist named Mahali, and it's called Flow. Thank you. Good book, man. Is that interesting? I heard him give a speech once. It wasn't very interesting. What he said was fantastic. That was amazing. Flow means when you're in a state of flow, nothing counts but the activity that you're doing. Your sense of time is altered. You're in a timeless state. Your sense of self is diminished. Only the activity counts. That's what we want. Vincent Mahali and his colleagues have done all kinds of great studies like this, on this, looking at people doing various activities. Mountain climbers in Italy, when they're climbing the mountain, nothing else matters. My favorite study was motorcycle riders in downtown Tokyo. The teenage boys and young men in their 20s and late teens would ride their motorcycles really loud downtown Tokyo, the gangs. And they interviewed them. Their hypothesis, why are you doing this? Their hypothesis was they did it to impress the girls. Turns out that was true. But they also were in the state of flow. When I'm on the motorcycle, nothing else is there. It's only me, the motorcycle. I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am. It's pure happiness. This is what we're looking for. I want to give you some case histories that have changed. I'll give you one that have changed my thinking, I think, for the benefit, and might be extremely valuable to you. This case history, what I'm going to share with you, my colleague and I, Christy Lau and I, wrote an article about this young man, and in the article we called him Paul, but I'll use his real name, which is Vincent, because he's Christy's son. Vincent grew up, he's now a high school senior, trying to get into the right college and all that, in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Mommy and Daddy are both from Hong Kong, and Grandma and Grandpa lived with them for a long time, and they were all Cantonese speakers. So Vincent grew up bilingual Cantonese English, quite comfortable in both. When he was a little boy, Mommy and Daddy were working real hard, and Grandpa and Grandma weren't living with them, so they got babysitters every so often to take care of the kids. The babysitter would come over, turn on the television to Mandarin cartoons. Now, you know this, but most people in this country do not. Cantonese and Mandarin are different languages, okay? Just like Italian and Spanish are different languages. There is a similarity, a shared vocabulary, but if you speak Cantonese, that does not guarantee you can understand and speak Mandarin, okay? It is a help, but it doesn't really ensure it. But with his Cantonese vocabulary and the high quality of cartoons, I'm a big fan of cartoons. I still watch SpongeBob. I think SpongeBob is so cool. Okay? I think SpongeBob is wonderful. What a nice guy. Patrick Star, what a good friend. Look at him. Anyway, he would watch these cartoons in Mandarin, and with his vocabulary in Cantonese, and with the visual and the help of the caretaker, he started understanding them. And gradually, time went on, he got better and better. Over the years, he started watching children's programs in Mandarin. And when he got to high school, Dad would come home with 2 movies in Mandarin every weekend, and the family would regularly get together in the evening and watch the news in Mandarin. Today, Vincent speaks Mandarin. When company comes over and they're Mandarin speakers, he has no trouble. They travel to China, mainland China. They have traveled to Taiwan professionally. He's come with. He has no trouble at all. His Mandarin is quite good. Vincent doesn't care about Mandarin, one way or the other. He's not against it. He's not for it. He was never interested in learning Mandarin. He never thought, Anban keeps telling us, that's the Chinese Cultural Office, that all the Pan-Chinese language is Mandarin, and we should all learn Mandarin. This big push in Singapore, all Chinese people should learn Mandarin, all these things. He didn't care one way or the other. He liked the cartoons. It was the story that counted. Today, I am announcing the death of the concept of motivation to learn a language. It doesn't matter. It plays no role. When we tell our students, you really should pay attention in your Chinese class or your Spanish class, going to be good for you someday. You say that to a 9-year-old, they don't care. You go do it. You tell them a good story, and it will happen whether they want it or not. Language acquisition is involuntary. It's the result, the byproduct of getting compelling, comprehensible input. Let me summarize the theory. We acquire language when we get comprehensible input, and it helps when it's interesting, and it helps even more when it's compelling input. That's our job. Let's now talk about language teaching and language classes. Let's say someone comes up to you and says, you know, you're a professional, I've always wanted to learn to speak Spanish. What should I do? What do you tell them? Go off to Mexico? That's the usual thing, right? Go to Spain, go to Mexico. Or I've always wanted to learn to speak Chinese. Well, go to Beijing, learn Chinese. No, bad advice. Let's say you go to Beijing, you go to Mexico City, you don't know any of the language. You won't understand anything. It'll be just like that German class all day long. But if you go to a language class, the first day, you can get 40 minutes of comprehensible input. Beginners belong in language classes. You can get more input in one language class than you can from a week of being in the country. What's happened to me, has happened to some of you. You go to a country where you don't speak the language, you're there for a week. After a week, you've learned 5 words, and a month later, you've forgotten 4 of them. Isn't that true? Language classes are much better. Beginners belong in language classes. The goal of the language class is to put you in a position so you can go to the country. You don't have to be perfect. So you can get better on your own. I am an intermediate in Spanish. It's great in my line of work. It's so much fun being good at some languages, sort of en-how in some languages, mama-hoo in others in the middle, and boo-how in others, you know, terrible in others. It's really exciting all the time. So, and I can feel what language students go through. Spanish, I am exactly intermediate. I don't need a language class, unless I can get, you know, Karen Rowan or Jason Fritz now with the classes, it would be really exciting. But in general, language classes would help. But I can talk to people. I'm good enough to have real conversations with people on a lot of subjects, not everything. And I can read in Spanish. I can read novels that I'm interested in. I can read newspapers. Not everything, but some things, okay? I read Zorro last summer. Isabel Allende. Why didn't you people tell me about her? Oh my gosh, was it good? It was a bit of a challenge, but it was so well written, so every single sentence was exciting, where she pushes you along all the way through with something. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I should do next?
No, what story did you...
Zorro. It was the prequel of Zorro. How Zorro, grew up in California and went off to Spain, learned how to be a master swordsman, came back. I don't know what's happening. Okay, it was very exciting. Anyway, so that's the idea, to make students intermediate. To be an intermediate, you need 2 things. Intermediate level of competence, so you can understand, and know how to improve in the language on your own. You should know about comprehensible input. We don't need return business. We'll always have new customers. We want the people in our classes to go out and improve on their own. They don't have to be perfect. An analogy. When you started your teaching, were you the polished professional that you are today? No, you get a lot in the outside world, of course. Every year I learn more than I did in college, of course. But my university was necessary. Otherwise, I couldn't have started my profession. That's the idea. We want to give students this foundation so they can continue to improve on their own. Let's talk a little bit about methods. I'll give you the historical review of methodology. And the review of methodology is a constant increase in compellingness. Back in the 1960s, when I first got involved in this, in the 70s, The current methods then were the audio-lingual method and grammar translation. They were zero compelling. In fact, they were profoundly boring. My hypothesis is that 95% of the students in traditional methods hated them. The 5% that liked it became language teachers. You see the problem? Okay, they pass on the torture to the next generation. The breakthrough, as you've heard today from workshops, came with TPR, James Asher, total physical response. That was a phenomenal step forward, where suddenly things got interesting. You actually got comprehensible input. TPR, as magnificent as it was limited though. You only did certain things with it that you could model with actions. After that came natural approach. I got some of the credit for natural approach, undeserved. Tracy Terrell really developed it, and I added the theory, which happened to coincide. And the goal of natural approach was fill the classroom with comprehensible input. And that was pretty good. The better than that is TPRS. The goal of TPRS, the core of TPRS, as you have seen by now, is stories. Stories that are co-created by the teacher and the students, where the students are not only co-create the stories, but are very often part of the stories. It is personalized, a phenomenal way of making things compelling. The stories are about them sometimes and who they are. We all love stories. Stories, theoreticians in rhetoric say that we regard our lives as one big narrative, where we are the protagonist, we are the hero, and is it going to come out okay in the end? Can we win? Etc. And you all know what to do. I'm going to give you some advice to improve your social life. If you know you're going to be invited to a party, and you know you're not going to know anybody, go see the latest 3 movies. Isn't that true? And you can always start a conversation. Have you seen the new Star Trek movie, or blah, blah? You can always get something started, okay? It's because everybody likes stories, and you'll always have good conversations with people. They know how to discuss movies and stories as if it were a high-class literature class, etc. They can discuss the actor, the director, whether the plot was good, etc. Now, although these methods are good, and the research on them is sensational, study after study has compared comprehensible input methods to traditional methods. We have never lost. Published studies in the professional research. This isn't enough, though. What this does is bring you to this low intermediate level. Sometimes, though, we want more. We want our students these days to get academic language. You've heard this? We're being told we want academic language. But they're going about it the wrong way. First of all, I don't like the term academic. When you have the term academic, it's as if everyone's going to go to college and get a PhD in medieval history. That's academic. This is elite nonsense, in my opinion. I know, because I'm one of them, all right? What we really want is the highest level of specialized language, which every profession has. It's not always university. I think the push for university and college for everyone is a terrible mistake, and does not recognize that people have different kinds of intelligence and different kinds of genius. Former secretary in the presidential cabinet, John Gardner, said this: if we praise mediocre philosophy and disdain competent plumbing, neither our theories nor our pipes will hold water. So we're going after this high-class academic stuff, which is fine for crazy people like me, but it's certainly not for everybody, people with different geniuses. And instead, we push people to find their own interests. We're all a little bit different. Get really good at them, we'll be better off. Regardless of your interest, there is specialized language. How do we get it? My plan. There are 3 stages to reaching the highest level of language. And this is something for first language and second language both. And these are stages you have gone through. Number 1, stories. Stories, stories, stories. For little children in elementary school, story time is fabulous. All kids like to be read to. They like mommy and daddy to read to them. They like their teachers to read to them. The middle stage is what you went through when you were a teenager. Reading for pleasure. Reading the kind of books that your teachers did not approve of. Mom said, are the lights out and you're under the cover? Reading Nancy Drew meets the Hardy Boys, okay? That's what made you the person you are today. Massive amounts of basura. Massive amounts of light, easy, what some people call junk reading, which most of us went through. In my case, it went from comic books. From there, it went to sports stories. From there, it went to science fiction. That isn't enough. That isn't enough, but that was the bridge between low levels of literacy, higher levels of literacy. That brings you to enough competence to make truly heavy literature far more comprehensible. The heavy literature could be text and nuclear physics. It could be how to repair a car. It could be TV repair. It could be anything that you're, carpentry. It could be anything. Every profession now requires more specialized reading. This is the path. For this to happen, two things have to happen. We need to get students excited about reading in books. And this happens when we do reading in school. Sustained silent reading periods where kids have a chance to read what they want to read. We should do it in first language. We should do it in second language. Their vocabulary will get better. Their grammar will get better. Their writing style will get better. Everything, vocabulary, everything improves. In fact, this is the only way you can get these things. And it needs to happen. The only way it can happen is if we have books available. My final point, and possibly the most important. Many of the students we have in this school, and the school some of you come from, like most of the students, do not have access to books. All the money is going into testing. The money is not going into libraries. We keep complaining about the low levels of literacy and kids don't read anymore, and we don't give them anything to read. We are spending all our money in measuring, weighing the animal and not feeding it. It is a horrible, tragic mistake. Libraries, 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 libraries. Classroom libraries, school libraries, public libraries, books everywhere. Print books, e-books, I don't care, but lots and lots of them. I'll close with a brief mention of a project that Hyman and I and our friends are involved in now, which is, I think, a way of using electronics to using technology to partially solve this problem. What we have in beginning classes in English language arts, in beginning language classes, second language, is a lack of books, a lack of stories, things to read. And the problem is, even for English, they're expensive. Good books, children's books, there's wonderful children's literature now. It's never been better, but it's never been more expensive. You want a good children's book, it's going to cost you $12.95. And you've got all these kids in school, how can you deal with this? So the book budgets are always strained. What we have been doing about it, we have given it a very modest title for Mandarin. We've called it the Great Mandarin Reading Project. Okay. Here's what we do. The home of this project is on a website which Hayu runs called Ignite Chinese, easy to find. And she and I and about 5 of our colleagues, some in the United States, one in Hong Kong people, one in New Delhi, all over Mandarin classes all over, we're collecting good stories. Stories that come out of TPR class, stories that some of us write that are easy. We send them into Hayu. She puts them on her website. The student who wrote it, his name is the author. With the help of the teacher, he becomes a published author. It's all for free. No publishers, no money, no contracts, no nothing. I hope this is the death of the computer as an educational technology industry. I really do. Because they're doing things so wrong and charging so much money. This is the way to use the computer, in my opinion. So if you want to read something in basic, easy Mandarin that's exciting and interesting, go to the website. There's a bunch of stories that you can choose from. Oh, good. This school is an active participant in the project. Yes, this is exciting, of course. If this can spread to other languages, we can solve the basic literacy problem in a few weeks. Why does it work? I'll tell you what you already know. You ask children to write something in class on anything. You ask them to send an and and a joke or write a story. You get 30 stories. 5 or 6 of them will be as clever as anything you have ever read. Isn't that true? Because children are enormously creative. We harness this power. So we are here at the beginning. Okay, that's my initial presentation today. Thank you for your attention, and we'll continue on with some of you later. Thank you.
Sir, I know you guys were taking notes, so was I. And just sharing a few